crumbling under the force of a renegade Al-Qaeda splinter group that's sweeping the north. Now the US president is considering airstrikes and drone attacks. The so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Syria insurgent group have captured the whole province of Nineveh. In this video, you can actually see some 3,000 Iraqi soldiers surrendering to the militants. Now, their sights are on Baghdad, and fighting's being reported just 50 kilometres from the capital. RT's Gayane Chichakyan looks at what effect America's offer to help to tackle the insurgents might have.
Militants with the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria are now in control of large parts of Iraq, including its second largest city of Mosul. They're now aiming at the capital, Baghdad. The fight against Assad in Syria has bolstered these Islamist militants and gave them new resources. And the sectarian feud in Iraq has allowed the group to gain momentum and recruits. The sectarian war in Iraq broke out after the U.S. invasion in 2003 and has been a source of constant violence ever since. Now the U.S. may invade again to stop the onslaught of the Islamist militants.
My team is working around the clock to identify how we can provide the most effective assistance to them. I don't rule out anything because we do have a stake in making sure that these jihadists are not getting a permanent foothold in either Iraq or Syria, for that matter.
The U.S. says all options are on the table except boots on the ground. U.S. officials don't specify what options they're looking at. This could include airstrikes. The goal of this militant group is to create a caliphate, an Islamic state, across a vast area that includes Syria and Iraq. But for many Iraqis, the prospect of being bombed by the U.S. again is no less daunting. They're already being shelled by the Iraqi government, which is striving to drive the militants out. When taking over Mosul, heavily armed radicals overran police stations, freed more than 1,000 prisoners from the city jail, and took over the international airport. Iraqi forces apparently ran in the face of the onslaught, leaving behind weapons, uniforms, and armored vehicles. More than 500,000 people have fled, seeking refuge. The situation for most Iraqis is dire, and it has been so for years. They were promised democracy, but all they've seen is violence with no end in sight.
The jihadists have also managed to seize some American army hardware that was supplied earlier to Iraq to help it fight the insurgency. Michael O'Brien, who was a US Defense Department contractor in Iraq, discussed Iraq's disintegrating security with Anita Nawi in RT's In the Now.
You now have, instead of suicide bombers and all that and people getting killed, now it's gone to the next step. Instead of people just being people getting murdered, now they're taking actual land. They've, for all practical purposes, running Anbar province. They're taking over the country now.
How much responsibility should put on the Iraqi government here?
Well, the Iraqi government's incompetent. It's inept. But you know, the job is impossible. You know, Saddam was a bad actor. He was a bad guy, but he kept a lid on everything through force. The Maliki, you know, is a Shiite. And the Sunnis are upset because they were in charge and they want to take over again. And Saddam kept a lid on all of this. Maliki doesn't have a prayer. The Iraqi government can't, and I don't know if any Iraqi government could do this unless it was a dictatorship like it was under Saddam.